2, 1. We are live, or at least I think we're live. And I'll say this with every conversation that we have on these things is please to make sure that we're not talking to ourselves. On LinkedIn, somebody please drop a comment just to say hello. Tell us where you're tuning in from if you're watching. I do have it on my side here, and it does look like it's connected. But yeah, drop us a comment and let us know where you are dialing or tuning in from. And I'm really delighted to have 3 legends of customer experience and contact center, who I will let them introduce themselves. I won't steal their thunder. But yeah, today we are asking the age-old question: is the contact center customer experience dying? There's some strong views about that, particularly from customers. But we've all got an opinion ourselves here. And what I want to do as part of today's session is share some examples, share some stories about what we've seen as an answer to that, or as a way of avoiding some of that pitfall, and give people some opportunity to take some really awesome insights and takeaways. And we are live because Catherine Simons Porter has just said hello. So thank you very much for tuning in, Catherine. And with that, before I start, I'm going to hand over to my awesome panel to say hello and introduce themselves. And we'll start with my top right-hand corner, and Vinay, over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Vinay Palmer. I'm a keynote speaker. I help organizations answer the question, which is what makes some customers stick while others drift away. Spent about 30 years in this space, not as a speaker always. That's what I do these days, but have done roles both in an executive level, leading customer service, customer experience transformation, but also worked as a consultant on the outside too.
Brilliant.
But started my career as an agent in a contact center. So that's
what we like to hear, Vinay. That's what we like to hear. Those success stories going from frontline to famous. And speaking of famous, Martin, a lot of people don't know who you are, but I'll let you give yourself an intro.
So I can do my normal intro. You know, been in the contact center since 1981, done all of that stuff. Been passionate really about trying to do it well, I must say. Currently, because I'm always mucking around with how I try to describe myself, my latest is to say I'm an AI readiness designer.
AI readiness designer. Love it.
Yeah, that's my thing. So I'm really in the business at the moment of trying to make sure organizations are ready to get value out of the tech, you know, because the tech really by itself clearly isn't making a difference right now. So I'm concentrating on the bit that we tend to leave on the table and we ignore. That's me.
Well, I'd be really interested to get your views on how we get AI ready and avoid some of those CX pitfalls as we get into the meat of this conversation. And then last but not least, Mr. Wilkinson, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Cheers, Gary. Yeah, so similar to Vinay, my kind of journey started on the phones. Not going to talk years at this point, but definitely started on the phones, did the whole call center career where you build yourself up to management and run operations, and then did a lot of kind of process change, business change as well, which led me into running my own consultancy because I felt a bit restricted trying to just work within operations. I wanted to help other contact centers improve what they did. So I did that for a number of years, realized that technology was kind of one of the ways in which I helped contact centers improve. And therefore, I took an opportunity to get onto the vendor side of stuff. 10 years later, I've worked for several different vendors and supported contact centers to use their technology. And then the opportunity came up last year to join the team at CX Today, which is a publication that very much looks at contact center technology, CX technology across the board. And it's like I'm a kid in a sweet shop. I'm basically like the geek's dream. I get to speak to all these great people. I get to really keep my finger on the pulse of what's going on, and hopefully, more importantly, get to cut through some of the hype that's going on and try and get to the good stuff that is actually about delivering results. So I kind of I'm bringing maybe a little bit of a different slant there.
Nice. Thank you very much, Rob. And we've got lots of people saying hello to us. So Catherine Simons Porter is saying we are looking cool, calm, and collected, especially you, Martin, in your summer shirt. We've got Elaine Lee saying hello, and we've got Ragnar saying hello. So we are definitely live and being listened to, which is great. And we're talking today about I mean, I said it cheekily earlier, is good customer experience dying? But I think we've all been at the mercy of bad customer experience. And I think some of those experiences are not evolving maybe as at the pace that we should. And when we were researching some of this, there was some interesting stats that were coming out that were talking about how customer experience is. And I'm sure if you search for how great customer experience is or how bad customer experience is, you're going to get the answer that you're looking for. But what some of the stats that were coming out with, which I thought was useful to share, is there was a survey done by Forrester in 2025 around the global CX index, and they found that only 6% of brands have improved their customer experience scores, while 21% were in decline and 73% will just stay in at the static status quo. So it got me thinking about how we frame this question and how we start to think about what does good CX look like. And I think when we look at either the UK CSI or the American CSATs, we're all typically in and around the mid to high 70s. And I know from conversations that I've had when I'm sat in the boardroom, either as an operational leader when I was running teams versus conversations that I've had as a consultant. If your CSAT started with a 7, people were starting to tug at the collars and they were starting to ask, why is it not improving? But it's not improved for about 10, 15 years. So today we're going to unpick why some of that might be and think about what is the future for delivering good customer experience. So I've got questions that I'm going to ask the panel, but I've also leaning on some of the people that are watching to say, if you've got a burning question that you want to ask one of the panelists while we're here, you can do that, and I will share your question a little bit on the screen like this. Obviously, Steve Sullivan said something in the comments, so check out what a scandal Steve Sullivan has said. But do drop your question in, and we'll add in those, and we'll pitch it to the panel. But I'm going to start with my first question for the team, and just trying to get I suppose a flavour of where we are, or how we are where we are. And I'm going to start with you on this one, Martin. And I think there is billions being pumped into and invested in, whether it be AI, be it automation, CRM, digital platforms. But that customer experience, as I mentioned earlier, is still largely stuck in the high 70s. So why do you think that customer experience maybe is plateauing? And I'll come to you first, and then if Vinay or Rob have an additional perspective, I'd love to hear it. So Martin, why do you think we're plateauing?
Well, I think, first of all, I think some are plateauing, some are not. So let me try and use that way of thinking about it. And it's not exactly the same data sources, but you can definitely prove it's getting better and it's getting worse. I think the getting worse is probably a bigger cohort, unfortunately, which is why a lot of us are aware of it. Yeah. But getting better is also definitely happening. And as you might imagine, you've got a virtuous cycle and you've got a vicious cycle going on both of those two sides. Nonetheless, technology is very much attractive, I think, to both groups. And there's certainly been a huge focus on us updating. We used to talk omni-channel. You're dated if you're still talking about it. It's still really there. But now we talk about orchestration. Now we talk about AI. Now we talk about whatever. And we've been persuaded to invest in the latest and the greatest. So I think the technology, as we know, but we never act on the point, is neutral. Right? It best enables something to happen. And we know this. If you've ever been on the side of the RFP process, I know that's been modernized, but essentially it's saying, I want to buy something. And you go through that process and you look at where the money is allocated and how you're pitching it. We have always had a weakness and a lack of confidence to invest in the things that matter because they're the intangibles. They tend to be learning, they tend to be developmental, they tend to be not short term, and they grow over time, and they are multipliers, by the way, of value, which is more difficult to prove. But what we're much happier to do is to buy something that's shiny, is a toy, something that we've demoed and we can see, and we equate all of the value through that. Now that's a failure of perception that is replicated over generation after generation of generation. I've done my time in systems integration and exactly what that looks like. So billions spent, but only on the technology, and then with an expectation that is somehow going to change. Now, the good organizations are adding in, to use the language I started with, on the other aspects of being ready, to do with data, to do with governance, to do with changing workflows, to do with upskilling, to do with, by the way, having a big conversation about what does AI do and what does a human do. I know we'll get there later on. But thinking about all those questions is the secret to extracting that value and therefore changing CX, versus you spent a bunch of money on some tin and you're only poorer, both in terms of budget and also CX.
So I'm hearing that we're all suffering from magpie syndrome there, and we're looking at the shiny latest and greatest. I'm interested in the vendor's responsibilities when it comes to helping you identify the outcomes that they're promising when they're starting up. But Vinay, before we get into that, do you agree with Martin there? Do you have any other perspectives there on why we might be seeing that plateau, or maybe maybe isn't plateauing and starting to increase?
Yeah, I mean, largely I agree with Martin. He always talks a lot of sense, so I tend to agree with him on many things, not on everything, on many things. So I think there's a slightly different. I would take a slightly different slant in this way, which is, I think if we zoom out and we look at it and go, I think two things. One, the customer experience label has been put on customer service, and it's just changed the badge, but it's customer service that we're talking about in many of these instances. And what the customer feels or experiences at that sharp end on the front line is a construct of everything that happens behind the line. So the investment in systems, training, learning and development, consultancy at this end is only dealing with the symptom. It's dealing with the interaction, the quality of the interaction. How do we make that better at that service point level? But what it's not doing, and where the focus isn't, is at where this problems start in the first place, because they always start further downstream. And I think as organizations have got more complex mergers and acquisitions, teams working globally, teams working offsite, onsite in different places, the ability of the teams that don't necessarily sit in that front line, because you often hear customers at the heart of what we do, customer centricity, customer focus. Well, if you're on the front line, it's really easy for you to understand and get a feel for what does that mean. But if you're in procurement, finance, commercial, marketing, not so much. So I think the investment and the focus isn't on that back end to go, actually, what's created here is what creates the experience on the front line. So that's where I would have, I would come at it a different way. So I think it's where we make those investment choices. And as we go into this world of AI and looking at technology, it amuses me that all the conversation is, oh, well, we'll place customer service agents with AI, it will make it better. That's the last place I would want to put it. I think deploying it in the areas behind the scenes that make you more productive, more effective, more collaborative, more joined up, which then results in a better experience at the front line when the customer interacts, is the right way around to look at it. So, streamline your procurement process, streamline finance, help people in the back end do the analysis and the data and all of that kind of stuff. So that's kind of where I am. So is it getting worse? Is it getting better? I think the thing that we're measuring is getting worse because the back end's getting worse. So that's what's showing up in the thing that we're measuring.
There's three things you said there, Vinay, that really sit with me. And one is around that whole, are we analyzing the right things and making changes to the systems and the processes that are impacting that back office experience? And what does the root cause analysis of that? And I think it's just, sometimes it's good to go back to that whole lean process management mantra and kind of saying, right, let's get to the front line and sit and listen to what's happening. But I think there's also two other bits that you've said there that strike fear into me, or I ask organizations when they say it, right, demonstrate it to me. And that first one was, we put customers at the heart of everything that we do, which I think when you scratch the surface and you look into that, isn't always particularly true. And people then also saying, we are a customer-centric organization. I think sometimes when you scratch the surface of that and look at some of the decisions that they've made around processes that they've changed, costs that they're looking to remove from the business, sometimes those two don't meet and they're at odds with each other. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I think it's more than just, I think lean processing is a great way to look at stuff, but I think it's even just simple collaboration behind the scenes. So I'll give you a really quick example, because I know you want to bring Rob in, and he's waiting there patiently. But I've been working with a client and they have a procurement team that procures this product or service. They are led by a timeline that says you need to do it by this date so we can publish it in a brochure and sell it to customers. So their role is go and procure the best deal you can. And then you've got a customer service team somewhere else that's measuring how customers like that particular product.
Yep.
What ends up happening is this procurement team working on their timeline go back and repurchase what they purchased last year, but the feedback about that product doesn't come until later. So they've already procured the deal or procured that product. And so it's not joined up. And then all that ends up happening is that customer service team spends the next year dealing with the complaints and the negative feedback about it. But if it was joined up in the back end, they might make a different decision. And you see examples of that all the time, like everywhere you look.
That siloed way of working, I think, is still causing lots and lots of problems. Rob, what's your perspective on this? Because you obviously, as part of CX Today, you'll speak to lots and lots of vendors who promise the earth and promise different outcomes and promise that things will change when you replace one tech with another, but we're not necessarily seeing that come to fruition in some of the experiences that customers are citing using that product, which is driving some of that plateau. What's your perspective on this whole thing?
Yeah, I think I'm not going to disagree with the other guys in the room, but I'm going to kind of maybe come with a complementary kind of position on this, and then maybe a slightly different lens to look at it through. So I think that we're actually throwing tech at what is fundamentally a human problem. And I think that over the however long you want to look back, the tech has always evolved. We've always, incorporated tech and tried to use tech. I think we've covered those points already. But what we're not considering when you look at these this forestry report that we've talked about is the kind of baseline human condition. So that's shifted an awful lot, especially lately. In that forestry report, they actually call it the pessimism paradox. So you've got customers that are carrying the weight of the cost of living crisis, the global instability, and they're bringing all of that into every interaction, and they're living that every day. So you've got basically an entirely different person that you're dealing with to what you did 10 years ago. And I think that there's potentially, an impact on the results there that is possibly being masked by the investment in technology. So it might have been an awful lot worse if we hadn't done that to a degree. But I think there's somewhere in between there. I think it's a combination of that and also the fact that we've not done a great job of it. I think all the people I speak to every single week have two things. They have a product to sell, but they've also, and I'm starting to see this coming very recently more so, they've got a lot of examples of where things actually haven't gone well. So I think we're still so early that we're only just hearing now about the kind of lessons learned stages. And I think this is the point where it's going to kick it off, because if people can learn those lessons and avoid those errors that other people have made, then they're going to have far more success in driving the new technology. So I think we need to be focusing on the people more, and that's not just about the customers. Our agents are in the same boat. They're living that same crisis. They're dealing with all that problems and bringing those to work, and we've got to find a way to help them out. And that isn't all about tech, even though every vendor who speaks to me every week will probably cry at hearing me say that. If you look at, I use vendor reports with a bit of pinch of salt, taken for face value, but Salesforce's State of Service report, which is a recent one, basically shows that 79% of leaders say that AI is essential just to keep their heads above water. So that's a huge amount of pressure on the businesses and those guys on that front line. They're saying that AI deflects 30, maybe 40% of the routine value at the moment. So if that wasn't the case, what would the agents be doing? They'd be even more buried than they are now. So I think we need to be kind of mindful of there's probably been some good impact from the technology that's been used. That doesn't mean it's been done properly every time, certainly not. But I know that in my kind of earlier years when I was consulting, I spent time in loads of contact centers. I think that, if you tried to fix an unhappy customer with a slightly better chatbot, I don't think you'd have much success. And I think that's what we've been doing.
So, you know what, I'm going to stick on this theme because it kind of ties into my next question around, and I love that phrase that you used there, Rob, the pessimism paradox. And I think you've got customers that are trapped in that paradox, but you've also got a whole host of agents and team leaders and managers that are sat in that pessimism paradox as well, trying to keep the head above water. And I think it's important point to raise, because I think what Forrester in their reports were saying is that the CX quality has declined for 4 consecutive years in most markets. And I suppose what the conversation you said there, and the question that I've got for you guys as a panel is to say, right, have we become so focused on efficiency that we've forgotten what customers actually value? And is that having a direct impact on the service delivery that we're doing, the back office resources that we're supplying, and relying maybe too much on AI to be able to deliver and drive efficiencies in these areas, which is then having a knock-on effect in that supply chain? I'm going to start with you first on that, Vinny, and then I'm going to come to you, Martin. So have we, or are we focusing too much on efficiency and forgetting really what customers actually value?
I think, yeah. The answer to that is yes, and we always have, and we always will. You've only got to look at the BPO boom when that BPOs first started, and we started outsourcing. That it was a labour arbitrage, do the same, do it cheaper, do it overseas, and we learned similar lessons to what Rob has articulated in his answer. That we suddenly realised, well, we actually got to train these people properly. It's not the accent, it's not the location, it's the rest of the stuff stupid. So there's that part. So I think there's an over focus on the functional part of customer service, so that efficiency is definitely something there. And I think that comes as a result, that comes at the expense of focusing on what really drives loyalty, and that's being able to deliver an experience that creates an emotional connection with you and the customer. Not always in that one single interaction, but over a period of time. I think the other thing, nuance within there as well, is actually I think that we've just got to the point that service is just disappointing. So it's not even it's not even that you get angry about it anymore. So you don't complain, you don't bother going through trying some kind of appeal. You just walk away, and a choice is so abundant now that you can just defect to another provider. I mean, you look at mobile services, there are umpteen of them now, not just the big 4 anymore, but all these smaller ones that are coming. So you just switch from one to the other. So I think the ability to switch, the ability of choice, all of those come into it as well. But I certainly think the focus is still on do it efficient. And to what Rob was talking about a little bit as well, I think because of that, and because the masking looks like, oh, we're defecting more customers to digital, or we're doing calls faster, it makes it look like we're doing it better. And I don't think we are doing it better. We're just doing it faster, and in a way that makes us look more efficient. But I certainly don't think that we're focusing. The balance isn't right between the two. Efficiency, you always need to do it quick, but I think the experience is.
You've touched on a really important part there, Vinay, and I'm going to come to Martin and just expand on some of those points that you've mentioned. And I think efficiency at the expense of loyalty, I think is a really key point to make. Is we're doing things faster, but that faster doesn't equal better, and that there is now an apathy in customers and customer experience. And I read somewhere that customers are more likely to switch now based on just one bad experience the multiples where they might have been. So that loyalty piece is definitely part, and that whole switching culture is one that we need to keep an eye on. So Martin, based on some of those things and some of the things that Vinny said, where's your head in terms of how over focused we are on doing things more efficiently, doing things more automated, and how that might be impacting customer experience, customer journeys, and customer value?
I have never once in my whole consulting career advised anyone to become more efficient. Total waste of time. What I will advise them to do is to become more effective, because effective gets the outcome. Efficiency is just obsessing with how fast you run around in a small circle. Right? So it's
efficiency over effectiveness over efficiency. I like
it. You're measuring entirely the wrong thing. And I will in part blame both the organization, because it's their responsibility to think clearly, but also the vendor community and the consulting community that actually defaults to the simplest way of describing value, which is measuring efficiency. right? But that doesn't translate into anything valuable to anybody. Any human involved in that loop, whether it's an employee, a colleague, a supplier, or a customer, or even a manager, doesn't benefit from that particular thing. It benefits very much in a manufacturing context. Yeah, the number of biscuits you can put through per hour, that's very useful.
Widgets. We got top widgets.
Providing, by the way, the quality of the biscuit doesn't go down. So even in those dynamics, you know, volume isn't infinite, even if you can mechanize a process. So people really haven't tried to bring together in the same way, you know, this is a conversation about, you know, chewing gum and walking across a street, or being able to hold a number of variables in your mind at the same time. It's the same thing that Vinny said earlier on, yeah, which is there's no point trying to be fabulous at the front end and learning how to apologize effectively if the people at the back don't know what the hell's going on and they don't even know how to who works for them, right? And it just remains systemically, and that's the whole point, systemically broken. And efficiency, for example, tolerates systemically broken organizational design because it just says work harder and I'll buy a piece of tech to whiz it through faster. And if you can get me a really sexy looking dashboard to make it look really nice on top, most of the people looking at the dashboard are never going to dig underneath, so we're fine. Yeah, let's go for it. And that cynicism gets reflected then in customers going, you know what, I'm never going to break out of this loop, right? So all we have done really is make sure we've built another barrier through which, around which, over which, under which you will never pass. We now call it, you know, the doom bot loop. Used to be called IVR, used to be called the long queue. It's basically a war of attrition on your goodwill and your attention. And most people know that you'll eventually give up if it's not really important, and you probably won't disappear because actually it's too hard to leave anyway. So you just remain more cynical about the way things are, and you discuss it over a pint of beer or a glass of whatever. You know, and that's
how these days on Google reviews, Trustpilot reviews, or anything else.
Indeed, and we just cathartic in that sort of way. So the only way you break out of that, you know, coming back to the group I was talking about earlier on, of the good guys, the good girls, the good organizations that have a passion, are obsessed, is that kind of corrosive mindset doesn't occur. You know, it's not allowed into the culture. They're working for different motivations. They've got different contexts. They've got different goals. And actually, at the end of the day, they've got different leadership, right? That's what, again, it boils down to. You can't build anything great if you really don't have people who understand it and care about it and stuff. Because it's in the definition of the title, customer care. Unfortunately, if you haven't got care involved, you're never going to deliver a good outcome. That's the long and the short of it.
And Rob, I want to bring you in here as well, but before I do that, I just want to kind of share a comment from Alex Mead. And I always get nervous when Alex joins a webinar or comments on one of my posts, because I'm like, is he going to tear shreds off me? But no, he's not. He's saying some really interesting stuff here, and that I think this sentence at the end here is that although of course we're happy for AI to help with the simple things, AI should not orchestrate, not deflect for the important, critical, or emotional points. And I think that goes to some of the stuff that you were saying there, Martin, about the clues in the title of customer care. And I think when we start to think about that, and when we start to think about how we are over-indexing on the efficiency over the effectiveness, I think if we sat and looked at ourselves as an organization and said, are we actually thinking about the outcomes of things, or just the inputs to things that are about AHT, that are about first contact metrics, all of those things, I think that kind of sometimes suggests that we lean on efficiency and don't question the effectiveness of some of those processes. And Rob, I want to get your view before we move on to the next question. And we are motoring through time today, so we're not going to get through all of our questions. But I want to get your view on some of the stuff that Martin and Vinay have said, and understand your perspective around that efficiency, effectiveness balance.
No, of course, and they've made really valid arguments. There isn't any doubt about it. It's a yes from me. We've obsessed over customer efficiency so much, and I think I think Martin's point around the vendors being drivers of that. In my previous life, as working on the vendor side, I've seen where, I'm not going to say mis-selling, but expectation setting was possibly,
mismanaged.
Slightly, and being on the receiving end of not just the customer being having a problem with that, but I've got to support that customer then and help them get the most from a tool that they've got. Kind of the grounding isn't great. So I can absolutely kind of testament to all of that stuff. Even more so in my latest role, a lot of my time is spent going to vendor events, like big events where they're talking about the future of the technology and everything that they're doing, especially at the moment with AI and everything. And I tell you now, there's an awful lot of discussion around ROI at these events. It's on every slide. But it's always this efficiency-driven ROI. It's this, can I put a pound sign or a dollar sign on it? And it's
how many heads is this going to...
Right. It's as if that's the only way you can calculate, you know, how you drive an improvement in an operation. And I think it's not the only way. I think it's the easiest way, and maybe, you know, that's why. And I think pound signs work when you've got to, you know, put a price tag next to something you're trying to sell, because you can try and say, well, here's some pound signs. And I think that's, if you think about it, the people who buy the technology are often not the people who use it, or at least they're very disconnected from the process. And as a result of that, they don't understand the impact of getting it wrong as much. I've certainly seen that. So when you've got vendors with big, shiny, nice stuff, talking to people who need something because they've been challenged with purchasing it, I think it's very easy to buy into all of that and believe the promises that are being made, and I think that's naive at best. But I think, and I'm going to kind of possibly be dying on a hill here, I think we need to come back to it. We've not just forgotten what customers are, you know, want. We've forgotten what our agents want as well, what they can handle. So, you know, if you look at all the data, it screams out that you can't fix CX without focusing on employee engagement, right? The numbers are there. I think Glassdoor have done a study that proves a 1-star improvement in employee engagement drives a 1.3 increase in CSAT. So, you know, that's a superb way of saying, okay, so if your technology can improve our employee engagement, we're going to drive up our CSAT or our however you measure it, NPS, whatever, and then you can put pound signs on that. So I think that's what we should be doing, but I don't think we do, and I think that's where it comes back to, because at the end of the day, if you were to change an agent's role the way we are doing it at the moment so fast, without the right support, without the right training, I think most of the time, because again, it's bought by someone else. Someone who's not in touch with the front line, who needs the kind of the training on all of this, then things are going to break, because basically you can't move that needle on CX, but without focusing on the employees.
I think you've touched on a really interesting point when you mentioned who's buying this and what's the purpose for them buying it. And Martin, this isn't one of our questions, but I'm going to go left field slightly. So
love it. Go for it.
And I'm going to draw some parallels to some recent political events around who's leading the country, but who's got the purse strings that are driving some of the decisions for the country. So I almost equate that to what's the role of the CFO, and how much are they influenced by the CFO in what they can and can't do in the contact center. And we know that contact centers are often seen as a cost. And I think that then drives that whole efficiency piece as we need to reduce things, we need to make things more efficient, we need to get costs down. How do we get people who are in those CFO buying roles, and how do we get the C-suite to realize that if they don't buy into improvements in CX, improvements in loyalty, improvements in growth at the detriment to the contact center's size, shape, and effectiveness, is going to make a difference? What are the messages that we need to get to those C-suites that might be tail wagging dog, etc., to actually get some better decisions made on tech, on investment in people? How do we beat that drum a little bit better?
I don't think it's a question of messaging. I think it's a question of evidence, and that evidence has never been compiled. So typically speaking, and folk existing at that place in the organization are definitely evidence and numbers driven, right? I don't think a CFO has got a philosophical position about a call center, right? I mean, they might have a number on a page and they're going to go, why is it that number? Let's make it as efficient as we can, because that's a default way of me thinking about keeping the purse at least full. But I don't per se hate it. But what I do need to know is, if you're going to tell me I should be spending more, why and how is that the case? So we don't really have connections between what we do in a contact center, and let's summarize that as being resolutions that are memorable and cause customers to feel more towards the brand. I've just said like that, right? If you do it lots more times over consistently, then eventually that kind of filters down, and eventually I may well be more up for buying more, staying longer, telling other people about it, right? That data sits in some of the places. I mean, the last place I saw that very well done was when Bruce Temkin was, involved with Qualtrics, and he absolutely nails it as far as I'm concerned. The European numbers are 5.7 times more likely on advocacy, buying something, long-time value. It's different, by the way, in Southeast Asia. It is different, by the way, in South America. But those are real numbers. Now, that's interesting, and I always love that data set. However, if you then kind of try and do that in an organization, that data, wherever it is buried, brought together as a proven, trusted piece of insight, used on a daily basis as a shorthand at executive level to make decisions on investment, is entirely 100% absent. Nobody in our industry in 40 years has made a significant impact on that. You might have had the top four do a case-by-case basis on that, just incrementally skim off some money, skim off some numbers in order to prove something locally. That has not become institutionalized as a way in which you drive it. And I suspect, and this is just a hypothesis, in default of that, if you started the argument and said, what's actually your mindset? What's your mental model of a call center and its value and what it's doing? I said, and we said this in the conversation when we were rehearsing it, I think most people are completely unreconstituted, even before the guy reinvented Scandinavian Airlines and the whole goddamn conversation began, right? It's basically, if a customer is buying something from us, we value them. If they're not buying something from us, they're not so valuable. And if they come knocking on the fucking front door, right, excuse my French, asking for something, right? No way. And I still think that drives the majority at an assumptive level of how we value different parts of our organization. Very few people in our space have proven through the numbers it's worth investing. That is the fundamental crack in the whole of this discussion.
And Vinay, I know you're itching to say something there. I can feel it through the screen, and I sense it's coming from maybe your lean to loyalty. But where do you? What's your thoughts then on the contact center as a cost versus the contact center as a value, and how we prove the value of that in different ways?
Yeah, so I think similarly to Martin, I think it is about the mental model. And I don't think it's a mental model about the contact center. I think it's the mental model about the customer and the value that they represent. So seeing them just as a transaction that buys from you, and not seeing them as a advocate, a referrer, somebody who's a brand ambassador, somebody who talks about you when you're not in the room. All of those things that we can't necessarily measure, but do happen. If somebody were to say to you, recommend this product to me, recommend a product to me, you'd rattle off one or two that you probably use yourself and do that without the organization ever knowing. So I think it is that. I think fundamentally it's a culture problem, and all the way through about how we see that. And I think the way that organizations are set up with individual budgets, where everyone's got their piece of the pie, where they're looking at what they've got on their budget lines, is part of the problem. If I can only use an example from my own experience of when I implemented Salesforce into a previous organization. If I'd have gone there just as leading the contact center and trying to get it in purely for contact center, I'd have got laughed out of the room because it's too expensive. You put the cost up and it won't deliver value. But the moment I collaborated with commercial and marketing and made it a broader conversation and said, actually, this is about improving our marketing effectiveness, data enrichment, customer visibility, understanding loyalty, and all those, suddenly the business case changed on its head. So I think that, I know there's a chat going in here about who should hold the budget. I think that's the wrong question. I think the question is, what's the group that come together to decide what we're buying and why we're buying it? And I think that collaborative effort is what's needed more. The trouble is, reward systems, cultures, departments are all constructed to work independently and separately in their own right. You just got to look at the reward systems in most big organizations around EBITDA. It's all about the bottom line. There's no customer measure in there. There's none of those in there. And so that drives the fundamental behavior in an organization to hit the EBITDA. Well, you do it by, you've only got one or two levers to be able to do that, right? And so that's where the attention goes. So I think it's fundamentally a cultural problem. So those the good guys and the good girls and the good organizations are good. If you were to peel back the layer, I think you would see fundamentally a different culture first compared to everybody else, which creates the foundation for the behavior and the decision making.
And Rob, you talked about in one of your other questions around those silos in purchasing decisions. Are you seeing collaboration in conversations that vendors are bringing to you to say, right, this is how we should be demonstrating the value and the cost associated to serving customers in a positive way? Or are we still having those siloed conversations around, this is my bit of the pie, this is what I need, this is what it's going to do, and it being disconnected throughout?
I think it's a good mix still. And I think again it's still very early in terms of some of the technology that we're now being sold to us. So I don't think everybody's got the ducks in a row and is ready for it. That said, I think both the kind of the guys' points on this are really relevant. And I think if you look at if you were to look at the procurement process, if you were to kind of if you look at everybody's technology, they've got loads of legacy tech. We've been so good. We talked about the magpie effect earlier. Like, we've been so good at bringing in a piece of tech for this and a piece of tech for that. You end up with this massive legacy tech stack that is got bolt-ons on top of it, and it's just this like unmanageable big thing. So as soon as you get down to the procurement process, that's a really big risk, because everyone's scared of knocking it over, whereas actually that's what they should do. I mean, it's easy for me to say that, obviously, because there are implications of doing that, but I would challenge any boardroom to say the way we've currently got it built is the best way that it should be built. And that if you were to start with a brand new piece of paper and you were to go, what is available, what are the art of the possible today, starting from scratch, would you do it the same? And I don't think anybody would. And I think that's a better place to start from. You'd have to be very brave to do it in a bigger organization. I've seen smaller businesses get away with it and really succeed, but I think that's kind of where we should be going. And I also think that vendors are aware of this right now. Something that we're seeing an awful lot of are, if you consider this rush to AI, we've got platforms that have done all sorts of things in the past, pivoting and becoming AI platforms doing something very different. Sometimes it's really good, makes a lot of sense. Sometimes it's jumping on a bandwagon, and it's difficult to discern between the two. However, what you have got is some of the bigger vendors, because the proposition now is evolving so much, they're actually in a completely different realm. They've got a completely different offering, and they're saying, I can compete with all that legacy stuff that you've got because I now do loads of that stuff as well. Because AI's kind of leveled the playing field to these guys. It's enabled them to compete in ways that they haven't been able to do before. And there's a bit of a gold rush going on with companies moving, like CRM companies becoming telephony companies and all that. That's happening as we speak. And I think that's a sign that in my mind, what I see in the future is these companies become all very, very similar. The strongest and the biggest wallets will survive. The smaller ones won't cut the mustard and will die. And I think that we'll be left with a situation where actually that procurement thing we talked about there will be far more possible, because we've got vendors that are more open to that and able to deliver on more things that you need when you knock that stack over.
But I think the key point that you've made, though, is that when you're making those purchasing decisions, a bit like what Vinay was saying before, is you got to have the right people in the room informing what the actual end-to-end experience is that you want. And I think I want to come to a question that we prepared for here in terms of the shift, I suppose, in some of the ways that we think customers want to engage with us versus how they actually might want to engage with us. And I think when we start to think about all of these tools and tech that are supposed to be improving customer experience, I think some of the stuff that we're actually implementing might actually be eroding some of the connection that we've got with the customer and with that human connection and that experience that they have as part of the attachment to the organization. So Martin, I'm going to start with you on this one, and you might disagree. I sense you'll have a view and you'll have an opinion. But customers often say they want self-serve and they want to be able to digitally engage with organisations. But then quite often there's a cohort where they complain when they can't necessarily reach a human or when they can't get hold of us. Would you say would you agree, or would you say it's fair to say that perhaps in the pursuit of good customer experiences and more self-serve, we've maybe over-rotated towards digital at the expense of accessibility?
So I put it like this, right? One of my design principles is as follows. If I'm going to design something, let's call it digital. I mean, everything is digital, so it's a nonsense. But if I'm expecting the customer to drive that to the point that they want to drive it, I will always, always, always create a great big sign that says, when you want a human being at any one point, take this route. Now that's counter to the ROI, the business case, the whole damn reason you've been told to do it. However, this is the point. If you have successfully, and it can vary by context, person, and situation, can be identical use case, but differently experienced. If they get to the end without needing any human being, you've got to the end without needing any human being, right? Yeah. It's worked. In another case, another day, another circumstance, I needed a human being and I took a left-hand turn, right? When you add up those numbers, you can then see at scale, roughly speaking, how self-sufficient the construct is to deliver that outcome and the degree to which you need humans. But we don't want to do that. The whole nonsense that we've done around a deflection versus resolution is, you know, if we were significant enough to actually get on the television, we would have a scandal, but we can't muster a scandal, but a scandal over the fact that we have done deflection instead of resolution for these years. It is scandalous. It really is. It's a nonsense. We've all been sold a complete pup. And it's much more simple than that. If we have confidence in a digital process, design it, but always make it available to humans. Because we as customers are programmed to one thing only, the shortest possible route to the outcome with the least effort, right? If you've designed that for me, and if in the moment it works like that, I don't want to spend my time waiting in a queue and then talking to somebody. I'm out of there. But if it hasn't worked for me, then I need a human being to compensate for that. And it doesn't actually cut very simply through easy up to complex. That's the default, but it loses all the nuance. So I would say very simply, have the confidence to always bolt escalation in a very elegant way, low effort onto everything, and look to see what happens.
Yeah, there's an interesting comment in the chat from Catherine around a Gartner study. A right to speak to an agent and an opt-out of AI. And I think, Vinay, I'm interested in your perspective in that whole over-engineering or over-rotation to digital at the expense of accessibility. Do you see that in some of the conversations that you're having that are impacting customer loyalty, or do you have a different perspective?
I think fundamentally we forget that we're dealing with human beings, and we design for a transactional robot that follows a happy path that we journey map and go, this is what the customer's going to do. And I think we, you know, exactly as Martin said, I could call a contact, I could try and contact a contact and to solve a problem on 3 different days, but I'm feeling 3 different ways. One day it's hot like it is today, I'm bothered, I can't be asked to use a chatbot, I want to speak to someone. Another day I've got time on my hands, I might try and go to a self-serve. I think fundamentally nobody wants to contact us. They don't want to speak to us. They're only speaking to us because we've made them speak to us because something's got wrong with that product or service that they cannot resolve for themselves. And when that happens, those people are calling in an emotional state, which is not their norm, and they need help. And the faster we can get them help to resolve that problem, that's the outcome that we're trying to do, whether that be digital, human, AI, whatever the thing is, it doesn't matter. But it's got to be designed for, like, we just need to give people access very quickly to the help that they want and design it well to do that. And I completely echo Martin's point, which is there should always be an emergency exit button that says, I'm not getting anyone here. I'm not getting anywhere here. Need to speak to a human. Need to speak to a human. Now, I'm not advocating that all human experiences are amazing, because some of my best digital experiences, some of my best experiences have been digital. Some of my worst have been with a human. Right? So that this is not a human versus tech argument. This is we talk about loop in the human or human in the loop as when we come to a service philosophy, but it's a design philosophy, design with the human in mind. What are they going through? How do you understand them? What do they need to use? And remember, when people say, think about the customer, there is no the customer. There is a range of customers, from the vulnerable to the, to the average, to the not average, to the old. That, like, you've got to look at all those things. And so that the voice of the customers and understanding your customers and their behavior is got to be central to that design that you put in place, so that people do that. And so, yeah, absolutely, I think it's a human design issue.
And you've made a really good point there around the what I like is that there is no the customer. I think it's a really good one. And Elaine Lee, who does a lot with vulnerable customers, you mentioned there, has made a really good point around customer outcomes and the consumer and the regulator. And I'm keen to hear your thoughts on that overreach or that overextension of digital, Rob, because again, in the vendor world, they're pushing that as the be all and end all of solving everything that's going to cost your contact center, but at the same time improve your CX. But we've got these myriad of customers that are the same customer, but maybe on different days have a different emotional perspective. How do we break that down in the vendor world so that they're not continuing to push these agendas?
So the good news on that is that in the right hands and with the right preparation and with the right training and planning, the technologies that we've got access to now have the art of the possible. It is brilliant, and it enables us, or could enable, the potential to enable so much more than we've not even scrapped the surface when it comes to things like vulnerable customers and being able to identify opportunities to step in, even to kind of automate the push towards a human, because not every vulnerable customer knows that they need to wave a flag. Sometimes they need to be supported in that part of it as well. Technology can do these things, but there's very few success cases yet. It's an art of the possible, but it's so early in that regard. But I think that's a positive thing that we should look at, and I think that we should try and encourage. I think it's not the thing that your vendor is leading with, because it isn't it's not got the biggest pound for it's not going to get the biggest bite from the customers, unfortunately, because the efficiencies have been driving that previously. So I think from that perspective, the interesting thing on the vendor side of stuff, what we are seeing right now, absolutely, is they love this, like this shift from deflection to resolution that we're talking about. They think it's amazing, and the reason they think it's amazing is because they've got a solution for that. Even though they sold it us earlier, and now they've got a new solution that solves all this. And we're definitely seeing that becoming a talking point from the vendor side of things. So, look, customers want choice. That's fine. It's how it should be. Customers want to get resolution when they use the channel that they choose. We can't force them in a route they don't want to go down. We shouldn't be doing, but we do. I don't think we've over-rotated. That's actually my opinion on this, though. I think what we've done is we've misunderstood what that fallout actually is. If you consider the happy path that Vinay pointed to earlier, what you've got now is like 100% of contacts that will be reaching a live agent are going to be your tier 3 complex, highly emotional escalation type stuff. We've turned our operations into, like, contact centers specifically into trauma wards. Like, we're basically throwing those really difficult conversations in there and still measuring them on AHT, right? So, here you go. Here's a load of like really difficult conversations. Are we supporting them to be able to take those kinds of calls? Probably not. And then we're beating them around the head with AHT? I hope not, but I think it still exists. So that's a huge. I interviewed Mark Ashton at ServiceNow only yesterday, and he shared a great story. So I will share it. There was a utility company, and they'd basically adopted AI for like call intros and call summarization, that sort of stuff, bookending of the call, I guess you'd call it. And there was basically a natural kind of disaster scenario, which basically drove their talk time levels to insane, like stuff that you couldn't imagine. It was like insane. And it was within the kind of just a couple of hours of this incident happening, they realized that actually their agents couldn't cope. It was true stress testing of this kind of, does this stuff help? And the agents were basically so overwhelmed within such a short period of time that they had to factor into and into the day these air gaps that they put in between their shifts, because they couldn't recover from it's intense empathy constant. It's too much.
And
I think
sorry,
trauma wards are a brilliant metaphor. Go on, Vinay.
No, I was just going to say, and if you add to that, sorry, just to echo what Rob said, Rob, the other thing that to bring into the mix is today you've got a lot of agents still working from home. So not only are they dealing with the trauma, but they're dealing with it in their home, in a room they would normally use for family time or dinner time or bedtime. So it creates another negative anchor, and that has an even bigger impact on their overall well-being. Sorry, I just...
Let me add one other thing on top of that. We, again, collectively, and we're not unique in this, humans are just dead lazy on it, we never get ahead of the curve. We try to then use technology to fix a problem once the problem has turned up, right? So it was blindingly obvious if we'd have spent 2 days in a nice hotel outside, changing our brains and thinking about what's going to happen when self-serve finally bloody well works, how intense the conversations are going to become, and how intense the AHT clock dashboard doesn't work in those situations. And we might need to do something a little bit more than the empathy training, and having a first aider on post. I mean, these are kind of inadequate little things that we do afterwards. So what I mean is, we don't really get ahead of ourselves talking about where are we heading? What's it going to look like? What's it going to feel like? What would we design for ahead? Because putting that stuff in takes at least 9 months to test it, at least 9 months to scale it and get something humming. And if it's all moved on by that point, we're never ahead of ourselves. And we've slapped a whole bunch of tech in, and the tech gets blamed from it. So actually, there's a fundamental problem here, which is that a customer service environment is the one that hits the sharp end of the change in the world at large and in our customer base in particular. That's the place where there's got to be a concentration of those kinds of people in the business, the strategists, the scenario planners, the really talented people saying, what are you seeing and hearing? And let us work out how we should be helping you to do that stuff. Ever heard of that taking place? No, right?
I've got one final question that I'm just going to chime in for a 30 to 60 second soundbite from each of you, and I think it's just, I suppose my question to you all is: have we spent the last decade maybe making customer service cheaper rather than making customer experience better? And that should take us to the top of the hour. Vinay, what's your thoughts?
Oh God. In a nutshell, yes. I think it goes back to our focus on efficiency, not effectiveness, as Martin put it. I think we have definitely been chasing that because of all of the culture of the contact center being seen as a cost center, not being seen as a value center. Just think of it: if you were producing a movie, you wouldn't underinvest in your actors and then expect them to do a great job on screen. But equally, you wouldn't give them poor set designers, poor makeup, poor lighting, and all of those kind of things as well. So you need to bring the thing together. So to get that final product on screen, the thing that gets you engaged, excited, that gets you going, wow, what an incredible movie. All of that stuff behind the scenes has got to work great as well. But you still got to invest in great actors on the front line.
Martin, have we spent the last decade making customer service worse?
Yeah, and the tragedy is, I think most people have been labouring on the illusion they've been trying to make it better. That's the real tragedy. They've ended up with what they think is a weird outcome.
I think it's a very valid point. Rob, as someone from the technology world, would you agree? Have we made the last 10 years worth of customer service cheaper and more duller as a consequence?
I think it's really difficult to say that it's definitely gotten worse. All the stats aside, I think there's a big thing we're not comparing, which is the expectations shift at the same time. And if we hadn't deployed the technology, just how bad would it have been? So these plateaus, it could be a lot worse. And I don't think it's easy to measure that because, and that's the thing about these stats, isn't it? That they're not like for like. But what I would say is I don't think we've made it cheaper, no, at all, because not just because of the kind of the financial side of that argument, but more that I believe that we've just literally shifted all the what you might call tech debt, and we've spent all that money on the wrong side of the equation. This is the whole point around if you go back to that blank piece of paper and you start from scratch, you're more likely to say, actually, here's a load of things that we know we can fix. Here's a load of things that we should be doing before we even bring the technology in. So let's do all of that, and let's spend this budget we've got to create something on all of that, so that we can get to the point where when customers become customers, they don't have to contact us, and that contact should be seen as failure. And then if we do that, I think we spend the money in the right place rather than on the technology. So it's not cheaper, no, because we've spent the money, but it basically we spent it on the wrong stuff.
Brilliant. Well, what do you think, if you've been watching today? Have we spent the last decade making customer service cheaper rather than making customer experience better? And are we any better off for it? And with that, we're at the top of the hour. So with 3 awesome speakers, I managed to corral you all together to do that in just about 60 minutes, which is a
great stuff, Gary.
So I'm just final thing for me to say is thank you to Vinay, Rob, and Martin. You've given us some really awesome insights. I've written some furious notes there, and we've got some really great quotes that we can share. And we'll be publishing this on the Contact Center Network YouTube page. So if you're not registered or you're not subscribed, I'd say click the button now, but it's not going to appear on there. But thank you very much for watching. This is our break now until September. So we won't have another one until September. So keep your eyes peeled for the next event that's coming out at the back end of September. But thank you very much, Rob, Martin, Vinay. Thank you to the many people who've been commenting furiously in the chat. There's been some real heated debate in the conversation there. So do go and check it out, because there's some great points made at the same time. But final thing for me is say thank you for watching, and we'll see you again next time. If I could ask Vinay, Rob, and Martin just to stay for 30 seconds more. With that, I'll end the stream and say thank you to everybody who's watched. Bye-bye.